Okay, here we go. Welcome to this month's edition of the Association Essentials Series. I'm Michael Johnson, CEO, founder, and owner of the HOALiving group of companies. We are grateful that you're joining us from wherever you are today. And even if you're watching this on recording on YouTube channel in a month, we're grateful for you still. Remember, you can access all of our training through the training tab, Association Essentials Series. There's a button, the most recent, or there's upcoming are announced, and then the previous session recordings. You click on that button, and it'll take you to the other options, the other things we've talked about. And I can't believe it's the end of the year, and we do take the holidays off. And so our last AES will be on November 2nd, Wednesday, November the 2nd, and we will be talking about insurance, a topic that we have to talk about every year in one way or another. Follow us on social media, please. We put a lot of this content in little macro bites during the month. And you can, if you love the Facebook, there's a Facebook QR code for you. If you love the LinkedIn, the Twitter, or the Instagram, and we have announcements of our education, little hints, company information, all kinds of great things. So you can just put your phone right up to the screen and should be able to get those QR codes, or just search HOALiving on any of these platforms. Some of them have a underscore in them, but yeah, join us in social media land, a land of very few positive contacts, and we think ours are positive, so please join us. All right, let's get in. Today, association elections, what to know and how to prepare. Wow, whoop, mind blown, right? What a topic. The goal is to find the right candidates to lead your association and holding successful elections. Successful means we have the right people and it's done correctly to keep you out of legal hot water. It all starts in the governing documents, of course, and let's look and review those. This is the HOALiving version of the hierarchy of governing documents. We put the foundation of the arch, right, or our laws and statutes. Those are the most important. They trump everything else. Then our CC&Rs on a recorded map, plat, or plan. Remember, in the state of Utah, the legislature said that the plat and the CC&Rs are equal. And so they don't really give a difference to one or the other. In Idaho, Arizona, and many other states, the plat has priority over the CC&Rs, but in Utah, they work together. Then the articles of incorporation, the bylaws, and the rules and regulations. Each community, now we all follow the nonprofit statute, right? And so laws and statutes in this case should, and we'll get that added to this slide. It should include the Nonprofit Act 16-6A in Utah, and these are Utah acts. You can find your similar acts for other states, but these are Utah acts. But the Nonprofit Act in many states will deal with elections in great detail because we're nonprofit corporations, right? So it all starts here. Sorry, going the wrong way. So bylaws are the part of governing documents that deal mostly with meetings and elections. So that's an important place to look. The rules and regulations and resolutions. You know, you'll find in your bylaws that you will elect 1/3 of the board every year, and they're 3-year terms, but you won't find things in there like, how do we break a tie, or how do we whittle the candidates down? Those things can be done by resolution. We'll talk about that today. And then remember, oftentimes, unfortunately, in old documents, you will find, and I'm saying old, maybe just over 10 years old, you might find in the CC&Rs, it says there will be 5 board members, but the bylaws say there will be 7 board members. Well, looking at our hierarchy, which one is closer to the foundation, CC&Rs? So if CC&Rs say 5, it's 5, regardless of if the bylaws say 7. I have seen in the CC&Rs where one page says 5 and another page says 3 to 7. Well, what do you do then if it's in the same document? Well, the law would allow you to draft a resolution and saying we're going to follow the 3 to 7 model, or we're going to follow the 5 model. If it's in the same document and unclear or conflicting language, then the board can determine that by resolution. If the CC&Rs say you'll have 5 and the bylaws say you will have 7, excuse me, you cannot do a resolution to say that you're going to follow the bylaws and not the CC&Rs. Okay, so remember our hierarchy. On this example, the lower you are on the arch, the greater the precedence the document has. So we're going to check the governing documents for how do votes work, when we're going to have our meetings, and other things that we need to follow that are important. Your documents might say, for instance, that you will have a slate of candidates picked by a nominating committee, and those will be distributed at least 30 days in advance of the election. Well, if you're in your annual meetings on November 1st, that means on October 1st, you have to get out the notice of the slate of candidates. And it might say at least 30 days before a slate of candidates has to be distributed, a nominating committee has to be put into place. So you're backing up your meetings on November 1st. The candidates have to be sent out by October 1st, which means your nominating committee has to be in place by September 1st, which means on your August 11th board meeting, you need to make that decision. So calendar out where your election is going to happen, and then sometimes you have to work backwards. On counting, we want to talk about some tricky language. Sometimes the documents say that people are elected by a majority vote. By a majority vote, well, if you have 50 people in the room, a majority vote is 26 votes, right? So what if you have 3 candidates and none of them get 26 votes? They split it almost equally 3 ways, right? 50 divided by 3, doing math in my head, right? 16 to 17 votes each. Well, no one got a majority of the 50. So what do? The documents say you have to have a majority, but there's nothing that talks about how to handle it when you have too many candidates and can't get a majority. Well, that's something you could decide by resolution, which often is person with the lowest number of votes is dropped off the ballot and we re-vote, things like that. So watch that kind of language. So number of board members, length of terms also is something to consider what you're electing for, and qualifications. Also on length of terms, I ran an annual meeting just last night, and they have 3 board members. They have offsetting 3-year terms. So last night, one of the board members should have been up for election, but prior to the meeting, the other 2 board members said, we're resigning from the board. And I'm like, can you wait a day or 2? But, there's nothing dramatic going on in the community. They're just tired of serving, and no one else has served for several years. And so technically what the documents say, and they're like, just elect 3 people tonight. Well, the documents don't call for that. The documents call for 1 election last night for that expiring term. And then the board members who resigned early, one whose term would end in 2023 and one whose term would end in 2024, those spots are to be filled by the board right? Filling that vacancy till the end of the term. So technically, because of the way it went down, and then only one person ran for the board. Over 50% of the owners were there, but no one wants to be on the board, and very common. And so only one member was elected last night. Well, even if 3 people had wanted to run, they couldn't have ran because the documents call for the board to appoint for resigning term members. Some documents will say that the board appoints until the next annual meeting. Their documents didn't say that. And so now that one board member who was elected last night will appoint the other 2 board members, one for the 1 year remaining of the terms and the one for the 2 year remaining of the terms. What kind of qualifications do we see for board members? Board members must be homeowners. We see sometimes these are potential. See that in red? These are potential qualifications. So a lot of times they do need to be a homeowner in the association. They must be in good standing, meaning they're current on their assessments. They have no ongoing violations, no legal issues outstanding with the association. They may not belong to any other board. That's rare, but we have seen that before. And board members may not have a criminal record or a felony. You see that sometimes. We actually had someone ran for board at an annual meeting last month, and they work for a publicly traded company, I believe it was. And because they got elected to the board, they had to report it because they're part of the reporting from being a publicly traded company, and they actually can't serve on a board of a community because there's funds involved and those kind of things. So they had to resign from being elected to the board. So there's different things like that. What if board member qualifications are missing from the documents? Well, remember, back to our hierarchy, if it's silent, then the board has the authority to draft a resolution to clarify or to make the qualifications. There are no specific qualifications in the Nonprofit Corporate Act, but you would definitely want to review those as you are going through this process. And any kind of resolution, we highly recommend all resolutions be ran by the attorney quickly after you've put it together, but especially one that would deal with elections. So what is a resolution? Remember, a resolution can enact rules and regulations or formalize other types of board decisions. They are used to clarify elements of the governing documents. Resolutions are used to clarify elements of the governing documents. And there's 4 different kinds of resolutions: policy resolutions, administrative resolutions, special resolutions, and general resolutions. And here is a very happy QR code. If you have no idea how to do a resolution, we taught on resolutions earlier this year. If you scan this QR code, it'll take you right to that video, and you can watch a presentation similar to this about resolutions. So I'll leave that up for a second, but that is, it was from May of this year, if you're looking another way, but there's a whole Association Essentials class on resolutions. So administrative resolution is what this would be. Administrative resolutions are for internal operations, where the board meetings will be held, election procedures, et cetera, et cetera. So you would do an administrative resolution. And by putting it in writing, what you're doing, right? What you're doing is you're putting it so that you make sure you do it equally and uniformly year after year. We've said this time and time again, the reason associations get sued is for not uniformly or consistently following processes. Doing it via resolution and put it in writing for everyone to follow helps make sure that you stay consistent. Who should serve on board of directors, right? what are the characteristics for being a board member? Sadly, a lot of times we joke it's that you are breathing, right? That you're a human being that is breathing, because the number of people who are interested in serving is definitely at an all-time low. It's work-life balance. It's not wanting to get into the weeds of disputes and tough issues. There's a lot of reasons. So one, they need to be interested, right? They need to understand the full nature of the fiduciary duty that they're taking. You're like, what? Fiduciary duty? I hear that word. You say it all the time. What's it mean? Once again, it's the responsibility to act in the best interest of a community association, maintaining increasing property value and quality of life. Acting in the best interest of the association as a whole, not individual owners, not themselves. Okay. Fiduciary duty. What are those obligations then that people have as a board member? Board must use sound business judgment and act in the best interest of the entire association, be responsive to the needs and desires of owners, be familiar with the governing documents and state statutes and federal laws that impact the association, establish and enforce the governing documents fairly and uniformly, set the policies, standards, procedures, programs, and budgets for the association, and implement decisions or delegate implementation to a manager, committees, or an independent contractor while not micromanaging, of course. Before these obligations can be met, of course, board members must be elected. And before board members can be elected, they must be open to serving their community and fulfilling their fiduciary duty as a volunteer. We are not making any money. The law allows for hard costs to be reimbursed. So if a board member makes some copies, yeah, they can be reimbursed for those kind of things, but not paid for their actual service on the board. Two ways to choose candidates: nominating committees and floor of the meeting. And this is an interesting thing. My perspective and opinion on this has changed in the almost 24 years that I've been involved in association management, where before, nomination committees were a little cliquey. So they kind of made nominations to keep the same people in power year after year after year. At the floor of the meeting, more open, less silo-y, and more candidates. That's changed a little bit, but let's talk about, and I'm going to go back to kind of where my opinion has changed, but let's look at the process of each of these. Nominating committee are selecting candidates ahead of a meeting. Election takes place virtually or in person, and virtual announcement or announcing live at a meeting. So, and by virtually, we mean the election can take place before the meeting. So sometimes your governing documents, and there's no state law that requires one way or the other, but your governing documents might say the ballot will be sent at least 30 days before the annual meeting. So when we're saying virtual here, we're not talking about necessarily electronic vote. We're talking about that it'll happen offline of the actual meeting. Then we can announce it after the meeting, or we can announce it live at a meeting. Doing it on the floor of the meeting, right? That means you can't have a ballot ahead of time. You're limiting who's voting a lot of the times to the meeting itself. And you can do paper ballot, or you can use some of the virtual voting methods that are out there, and we'll talk about those in a minute. And there's live counting and announcing at the meeting or the virtual announcement later. So holding an election, in the context of elections, when we say meeting, we typically meet an annual meeting, right? The annual meeting is where elections are held generally. The exception would be when there's a meeting to recall the board, and sometimes those provisions call for an immediate election at that special owners meeting. Of course, when we talk about really the powers that individual homeowners have in associations, they have the power to elect, and they have the power to sometimes vote on special assessments or loans if they're over a certain amount. So homeowner attendance and participation in annual meetings and elections are often the only way they can participate in the governance of their association. So if you're having an annual meeting, right, part of the process of all this is you got to have a location, date, format ahead of time so you can send out the notices. So 2 ways to hold the actual election: analog paper ballots or raising of hands, or modern technology, and we love this and we use this so much in these last couple years, and it's our recommended, is virtual. It's an online shareable link to a third-party ballot company. There's specialized companies in this industry, and every owner gets a link. It's unique to them, so it only allows 1 vote per link, and very helpful in running elections and getting more people involved than just those that attend a meeting. So let's look at some of the points of analog versus virtual elections. Analog, you can do at the meeting, and virtual elections can actually happen before the meeting. You can do nominations from the floor with analog elections. On virtual elections, you can and probably should have the option for people to write in candidates. Even if you have a full slate of candidates or even more, you need to include, best practices would be to include a place for write-in candidates. Okay, and a lot of times if there's 3 openings on the board, we only get 3 candidates, we can do a voice acclamation, show of hands to elect that board. You don't necessarily have to do ballots. We talked about that the virtual sent out via email. Analog, you count at the meeting, which can be cumbersome, especially if you're a condominium and every unit has a different voting amount of value. It's a little hard to count those on the fly. The virtual can do that for you. And with analog, you can announce results during the meeting or after. And the same thing with virtual elections. If you have your candidates before or even at the meeting, if you still want to have a meeting and have the nominations come at the meeting, you can still create your link, send it out to everyone during the meeting. Some documents require it all to be done within a meeting. If that's the case, you either have to amend the CC&R's bylaws or to do it differently. So that's why we go back always to reading the documents. So floor nominations, a discussion. So what I said before is that I used to consider floor nominations as a way to keep the same people in power, good or bad, in an association over and over and over, because a nominating committee is typically a couple people from the board and 1 or 2 people from not on the board. And so it was incestuous that the same people over and over, not good or bad. I'm just saying that's the way it was. So there is no statute in any of our surrounding states and Utah that require floor nominations be had. Best practice, I talked about, might be best practice to allow write-ins. but there's no code. Governing documents, however, a lot of times will say you must accept nominations from the floor. So you have to read those and know where they are and if you even have the option. Personally, from what I've seen the last 5 to 7 years, as attendance has over the last 20 years, attendance at annual meetings and owner meetings is just decreased, where now we're happy if 10% of the owners come and attend an owner meeting. That's a big number. I did a turnover meeting in a townhome community up in northern Utah about 5 years ago. It was a long build out. It was a couple hundred townhomes, and it took about 7 years for it to be completed. Of course, you know, in our housing supply problem in the West, they don't take that long now. Interest rates might make it a long time, but the demand is a lot higher now. At that turnover meeting, it took 7 years. The developer was in control. 200 units, 12 owners showed up. So 5% would be 10. So just barely over 5%, 6% of the owners showed up. And they were, I think 11 of the 12 were people that had been in serious problem people in the community over the years. And because that group nominated from amongst themselves, and those are the only people electing, the 5 members of the board that got elected were all kind of discontents, people that weren't in the best interests of the community, but with apathy and people just not wanting to serve on boards, that's what was left. So I've changed a little bit, where I do think that unless you have an active community, and we see in our active adult communities, communities with more retired folks, a lot more participation still. So thank you for that. But now I think I like the idea of a nominating committee that can go find the best candidates that are going to act in the best interest of the entire association and nominate them and put them on a ballot and get that ballot out either before or even at the meeting or even after the meeting. But it's people vetted. The board's gone and talked to people and know it's people that will represent the association at its best. Otherwise, you run the risk of, if it's only the upset people that show up at a meeting, that's who's going to be running the board. Some limitations to analog elections. You have to have ballots. They might have to be prepared ahead of time. If you're a condominium and different par values, you can't just hand a blank piece of paper, of course. You got to be able to identify how many votes they get. And you need to have an election counting committee. Our recommendation is at least one current board member whose term is not expiring, so they're not on the current election ballot, and an owner who's not running for the board or really has any relationship with anyone running for the board, an unbiased third party. There's more prep work, more documentation, and requires more participation from homeowners. Virtual election limitation, you've got to have email addresses, right? You got to be able to send electronic links to people. And so the board has to have access to those. You have to have collected those. More organization up front, but we're getting better at this. And this is how people log into their accounts to make their payments and to submit work orders and things. So the percentage of email addresses is increasing. Once again, it might not be the best in an active adult community or an older population community. You know, there's still a fair amount of people in those communities who aren't, the number of people who don't have a computer or smartphones very little in Utah and the surrounding areas. However, they might not be technically savvy enough to cast a ballot. So that needs to be taken into consideration. So obviously, we're recommending virtual elections. We do not have stock in any of the companies. There's multiple companies out there. They charge a reasonable fee for their services, and it's the safety and security and making sure people can't rig the system is why we recommend these companies. Election Buddy and Election Runner are just two of the companies that our clients have used. And you get all kinds of good, like you can schedule, put it all in, you can schedule the time frame for voting. So this is for a special assessment. You can do it for other than just election of board members. And it was for June 3rd through July 6th was the time frame that it would be open. And you can see here the results of this special assessment. 78.7% voted in favor, 21.3% voted against. You can get multiple choice for the elections, and then they do have this fraud analysis. And so it'll say, hey, 7 votes came in, but they all came from the same computer. It will figure all that out and it'll give you a warning. What happens if there are equal or fewer people willing to serve on the board than the number of spots to be filled, right? And so we talked about voice acclamation votes. A united oral proclamation can be done at a meeting. You know, someone could still say, I oppose. You can document that in the minutes, and you can ask that, but most of the time it's unanimous and they're just grateful to have people running. So results, analog versus virtual, right? You can see different pros and cons of both sides. And there's our, you know, you can include that write-in option still on the virtual elections. And so if people are thinking that the nominating committee is keeping this clicky or open, a lot of nominating committees are just making sure that people are in good standing. There's no lawsuits, they're current on their fees. And they're putting all those candidates on the virtual election ballot, not just saying, hey, we have 2 openings, we're only going to nominate 2. They're nominating everybody. Whatever you choose to do, and I love the additional transparency and including everybody, that gets rid of kind of my concerns from 20 years ago versus today, is just put all the candidates on there once you've vetted and make sure they qualify. At your first post-election board meeting, you're going to elect your officers. Almost all documents and corporate laws in Utah and the surrounding states allows for only members of the board to be the officers. Very rarely in some old documents, the officers are actually different than the board members. And I don't understand that. Like, which group's in charge? What if the officers agree to something that the board doesn't agree to? So it's generally, it's a board decision. Owners also get confused at annual meetings every year. They're like, who of these candidates is up to be the president? Who's up to be the treasurer? It's not, the homeowners in general are not electing the officer positions. They're electing board members, and then the board members from amongst themselves are electing the officers. These are the typical, if you only have 3 slots, typically you get rid of the vice president, you have president, secretary, and treasurer, or I've seen the president, vice president, and then secretary, treasurers combined into one position. Most state nonprofit acts don't allow the president and the secretary to be the same person. And that's because both of them have different things they can do via the Nonprofit Act. So President Wright represents the board among the members, sets the agendas, presides over meetings. They have the same authority as all other board members. Some people get elected to be president and they think I have veto power. There is no veto power. So it's all board majority vote, and the president's just the one at the head. Vice president fills in if the president's not able to run a meeting. The secretary, we say this a lot, maybe the most important position in an association, prepares and distributes the minutes, the agendas, meeting agendas, and any accompanying materials, documents, maintains the book of resolutions and all other official records. They keep the minutes. We should have had minutes there in all caps and really bold, but secretary is the person who takes the minutes, the official records of the community. Treasurer is like a CFO, right? They oversee the annual operating budget, maintain accounts, recommends financial actions, takes responsibility for the financial documents. All these things can be delegated to us as management, and we're glad to do them, but the responsibility still lies with these positions. So how do we get candidates? Who wants to do this after all this talk, right? How do we inspire candidates? How do we inspire people to run for our boards? We're not trying to get rid of you, board members. We love you. But if you're doing this for 7, 8, 10, 12 years because you don't trust anyone else to do it, or you can't find anyone else to do it, then you're probably doing too much, and maybe your work-life volunteer balance is not aligned and balanced as it should be. So let's find other people. Past and current board members set the tone and create the foundation for future board members. Your leadership can inspire other homeowners to volunteer their own time and talents for the benefit of the community, of the association. Lead by example, drive interest, and actively solicit volunteers to help on committees, to help with ad hoc tasks, to help at community events, and to even come and just sit and watch board meetings to show active participation. So when you're looking for volunteers, announce ahead of time that you have board seats and elections coming. Encourage involvement via flyers, social media, website postings, e-blasts, right? Verbal announcement meetings and community gatherings. Newsletters, we're getting rid of newsletters for the most part, and we're doing e-blasts and those kind of things, but that's the place we want to put it. Community petitions is go around and sign up people and talk to people, talk to your neighbors, talk to people in the community. When you have an interaction, maybe you've just been elected, and a month after you have a great interaction with a neighbor, say, hey, this person would be really good on the board someday. Keep track of them, especially when you're in, if you're 24 homes, you're going to know everyone. But if you're 1,100 homes, there's no way you know everyone. And most people don't even know the neighbors that are adjacent to their homes or their units. And so keep track of the people you have good conversations with. Finding the right people, right, leads to cohesive and desirable communities. Finding and inspiring the right people to serve on a board leads to consistent growth and leads to stability and leads to a great community identity, right? This is not about power. This is not about maintaining power. This is not about you always being in charge of where the funds go, keeping the dues low or keeping them high, whatever side of the coin you're on. It's about community identity. It's about stability. It's about growth, right? It's about cohesive and desirable. And so we're grateful for your time that you've taken out today to listen about elections and finding the right candidates. Not one of the more juicy topics of all time, but if you have any questions, please put them in. Do we have a chat for questions, Neil? How are we doing questions this month?
They raise their hands, and then we will unmute them for them to ask their questions.
And while that is happening, if you're a fan of today's presentation and haven't left a 5-star review previously, please scan the QR code for the management company you have, and please give us your comments. We love your feedback. It's important to us, and let people know that these AESs are an opportunity for people to learn some great stuff. Do we have any hands raised, Mr. Neal?
I am not seeing any hands.
Well, that is simply not because I gave such a great presentation, but that is because I have bored them all to sleep. And so
Elections are awesome.
elections
Really
are awesome. We love them. And if
we
we could just get our local, state, and national elections to be as kind as our board elections, what a great world we would be in.
Wouldn't that be a treat? It looks like we do have somebody, so I'm going to unmute them. Timberline.
Okay, so if you can just clarify, have you ever run into or seen situations where in small communities people won't engage and you don't have homeowners willing to be a part of the board? In that case, what happens? Does the responsibility fall back to the management company, or what would happen in that situation?
Yeah, that is purely hypothetical, of course. That never happens.
In the real world.
Never happens. Yeah, I mean, that's right. Well, one, it can't be the management company because we can only do what a board instructs us to do. So we're not an independent decision maker. You can't even contract that away. So last night, the meeting I was at last night, 22 total homes. They have 3 board positions. All 3 board members are just tired. They're the only people who have been doing it for like 5 or 6 years. They all resigned. Thankfully, one person was willing to step forward and run for the board. That one person is the board. They are tasked with going and trying to get other people that are interested to appoint them for those other 2 positions. But if no one in the community, if everyone's properly noticed, everyone knows there's openings and vacancies, and no one runs, a judge would say, if someone tried to challenge or bring a lawsuit, judge would say, look, you didn't volunteer. No one volunteered. You had one person volunteered. They did the best they could do in the circumstance. And so the courts will always support that one board member, even if it's only one. Now, have we had situations in small communities where we get zero people interested? And yes, that happens for a time period. And as management, we keep the lights on, keep paying the bills, but nothing's progressing, right? All those things we talked about at the end. There's no growth, there's no cohesion, there's no community building. And so our job is, and we came to a point in a community out in Tooele, Utah, a couple of years ago, where we almost went to a judge as a management company and said, Judge, it's been 3 years since anyone's been interested in being on the board. Some decisions have to be made. We are not, as management, we don't have the power to make that decision. So give us some guidance. Tell us what we're going to do. And what the judge would have done is they would have appointed at a cost a third party to make decisions on behalf of a community. And we don't ever want that situation. And finally, when we got close to that, we were able to get actually 3 new board members. And we had to do some door knocking as management. Really not our responsibility, but we had to go knock some doors, alleviate some concerns, talk about there's insurance to protect you if you get sued. Talk about that's not going to take 20 hours a week. It's going to be an hour a week or so, or a month or whatever. And so it was really some education that had to be done. But I get it, right? Things are adversarial and people pick on people on top. And our job of management is just to support you and thank you for being on the board and to make sure you have those protections and the knowledge and the things that you need. So I hope that answered the question.
Yes, thank you so much. That's helpful.
You're welcome.
All right,
Anyone
we
else,
have
Mr. Neal, now that we've broken the ice?
Yep, we got another question here. Kirsten.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
So I just had a question in regards to voting in general and having a quorum, because oftentimes we don't meet the quorum to have votes. In those situations, I guess specifically in an election, do you say we have to, try again when we do meet that quorum? Do you recommend like the online ballot, or is it just a majority rule that would trump over that?
Yeah, great. Neil, do you want to answer that? Because I think we definitely have a recommendation that we've been following for the last couple of years now when that happens.
Yeah, your bylaws are going to give you some instruction on what to do or how to deal with the obtaining quorum situation. One of the things that we have started recommending to our boards is, especially if they have that struggle and their documents allow it, right on the notice, put on the notice, hey, we're going to convene the meeting at this date, this time, this location. If we don't obtain quorum, we are going to convene the meeting and reconvene the meeting 5 minutes later. And we will continue doing that until quorum is obtained, because sometimes the bylaws, they'll say, hey, you got to have 50% of the association for quorum. And then if you don't, then we'll drop it down maybe to 25%, and then we'll drop it down to 10%. And then, all right, fine. After we've tried it 4 times, then whoever shows up counts for quorum. But that's really important to make sure that T is crossed and I is dotted, that the election is done properly. So those,
and a lot of documents don't prevent, in addition to reholding your meeting, which what we see, even like if you have a 30% quorum requirement the first meeting and it goes in half for the second meeting and it's 15%, we're struggling to even hit that. Unless the documents prohibit it, you call your meeting, you get your slate of candidates, and you can send out your ballot to your community electronically, and then that acts as a proxy. It's a directed proxy. And now you've met your quorum requirement because you had 100 units, you only had 12 people show up to the meeting. And so you now send out a ballot electronically, and suddenly now you get 50 votes, and you make it so it's a directed proxy. You've held your meeting virtually, basically. You've had your election virtually, and now you've actually had greater participation than you would have had inside of a meeting. So unless your documents, once again, run it by an attorney, of course, but unless your documents specifically say you can't do it, I believe state statutes support you meeting your quorum that way. Would you agree, Neil?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. We've seen this multiple times over the years and during COVID times, that the electronic ballot is a great way to get that quorum, because, hey, I can just log on. It's at my convenience whenever I need to and go in. And we've seen associations that haven't gotten quorum in years get quorum for the first time doing these electronic ballots. So that is another great option to help with the obtaining quorum issue that does come up.
Yep. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else, Neil?
There are no other questions.
Someone's calling in
Oh.
On the hotline with a question
Yeah.
right now. All right. Well, we're going to close it for this month. Thank you. Great questions, by the way, at the end. We love the participation. Next month, November, well, a little over a month, Wednesday, November 2nd. Sorry, I don't have a slide to show you again, but Wednesday, November 2nd at noon, we will be talking Insurance 101. Also, you're welcome always, if you have questions, send them in advance to us, and we'll make sure that we cover them in the presentation. Once again, happy birthday, Rachel I, and thank you everyone for joining us. Have a most lovely rest of your week.